Hello everyone, this presentation will be on nephrotic syndrome. Nephrotic syndrome is something which we commonly see in pediatrics and it is definitely a must know, and it is a short question for the undergraduate examination. So by definition, nephrotic syndrome is a triad comprising of three entities. Number one is proteinuria, and we can quantify this proteinuria as 3.5 more than 3.5 gram per day or more than 40 milligram per meter square per hour. So this is the first component. The second component is hypoalbuminemia. Less than 2.5 gram per deciliter. So this is the second component of the triad. The third component of the triad is hypercholesterolemia. More than 200 milligram per deciliter. So this is the basic triad of nephrotic syndrome. Nephrotic syndrome will also may or may not have edema. But because it is a triad, like I said, there are three components. The first one is proteinuria of more than 3.5 gram per day or 40 milligram per meter square per hour. Remember, whichever you feel is convenient. The second one is hypoalbuminemia of less than 2.5 gram per deciliter, and the third component of the triad is hypercholesterolemia of more than 200 milligram per deciliter with or without edema. So this presentation will cover the pathophysiology of nephrotic syndrome, the definition of nephrotic syndrome, which I have already told, the etiologies, classification, clinical features, how to distinguish nephrotic syndrome from acute nephritis, investigation, and a brief overview about the treatment of a typical first episode of nephrotic syndrome along with whatever complications may arise. So coming to the pathophysiology, the first thing, we'll just zoom in here. You all know that there is the structural and functional unit of the kidney is the nephron, and within the nephron you have an afferent arteriole and an efferent arteriole, the tuft of capillaries forming the Bowman's capsule. Then you have basically the proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule. You have the vasculature which goes around it forming the countercurrent mechanism, and ultimately all of these form into the collecting duct, and this is the loop of Henle over here. And within the glomerulus you have a tuft of capillaries which form the Bowman's capsule. Then within that, if you actually assess the basement membrane and look at the podocyte is nothing but a food process. This is a cell, and if you notice closely, it will have a glycosyloprotein coat, what I am highlighting here in red. Now focus on what is being highlighted in blue. So what is highlighted in blue is the endothelial cells. Now focus on what is coming in green. You do notice that there is some gap between these endothelial cells. This gap will ultimately lead through the basement membrane. So functionally, physiologically, there should not really be a leak at all. Whatever leak does occur is only sufficient to ensure that there is a urine formation. Now, that is a gross anatomy and a brief introduction to that. Now, with that understanding of the microstructure, keep in mind that the normal basement membrane is negatively charged. So, this entire portion is negatively charged. And with that negative charge present, it ensures that there is not much leakage. There is an entity called minimum change nephrotic syndrome, and in minimum change nephrotic syndrome, the histology is grossly unaltered. So minimal change, as the name itself suggests, there is no change in the histology. So in that minimal change, that negative charge is lost, as a result of which we know that already two negatives will repel each other. So two negative charges will repel each other, and the loss of that negative charge means that albumin proteins which otherwise would have got repelled don't get repelled, so there is an increased loss of albumin into the urine. It is as simple as that. So this was the albumin which was here. This was negatively charged. This is also negatively charged. This used to repel each other. Because it is not repelling each other, what happens is it goes straight through. So that is the basis of albuminuria in nephrotic syndrome. It is because the negative charge entity is lost out. Also keep in mind that it is an immunological damage, and it is ultimately because of the T cell mediated immunity loss. So defective T cell immunity is lost, and other interleukins like IL-2, IL-1, IL-6 will be present along with other cytokines. So the cytokine theory is well accepted. Because of the circulation of these cytokines, there is immunological damage which results in damage to the basement membrane along with other circulating factors. Now coming to the edema component. There are two theories here. One is called underfill and one is called overfill. So we already saw that there is an increased permeability of the glomerulus to albumin. It is already there. It's explained on the basis of the negative charge. As a result of that, there is an excessive loss. Excessive loss means reduced serum level unless it is replaced. So that causes hypoalbuminemia. Subsequently, we know that albumin maintains a plasma oncotic pressure. Loss of albumin causes loss of oncotic pressure. So plasma oncotic pressure will be reduced. When oncotic pressure decreases, there is a movement of water from the intravascular space into the interstitium. So we all know that there is already a third space component. As a result of this movement, there is a hypovolemia. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing. I will simplify it. When there is a movement of water from intravascular space to the interstitium, that itself will cause edema, because edema is because of excessive interstitial fluid. Now, what happens is, because of this loss of fluid into the interstitium, there is a relative hypovolemia within the intravascular space. So renin-angiotensin system gets activated because body thinks that there is a gross loss of water. Because of that, there is water and sodium retention at a cellular level, which in turn causes decreased plasma oncotic pressure and an increase of this cycle once more. To simplify it, edema is caused because of movement of water from the intravascular space into the interstitium causing edema. That is point number 1. This is accelerated by the compensatory mechanism which tries to prevent it, but in turn ends up worsening it. That is nothing but underfill theory. Underfill is because of an underfill of water. That's how the name came. Now the secondary component is overfill theory. Overfill, naturally as the name suggests, under and overfill are two extremes and opposites of each other. The overfill theory occurs because of primary renal sodium retention, because there is a relative loss, as we already discussed. Because of sodium retention, there is an increased blood volume. An increased blood volume also results in increased blood pressure. Sodium retention itself is a factor for blood pressure increase. So increased pressure, increased starting forces at a local tissue level, as a result of which there will be edema. So we have seen the underfill theory first and the overfill theory first. Both need to be described in detail. This flowchart is more than enough. Now coming to the definition of nephrotic syndrome, like I already mentioned, I am repeating it again because it is very, very important. A massive proteinuria of more than 3.5 gram per day or 40 milligram per meter square per hour, followed by hypoalbuminemia of less than 2.5 gram per deciliter as serum level. Hypercholesterolemia of more than 200 milligram per deciliter is the definition, with or without edema. Incidence of nephrotic syndrome is roughly 3 cases per lakh of children every year. And coming to the etiology, we classify it into two. One is primary and one is secondary. And as with most classifications, secondary causes is mostly because of some underlying disorder. Primary is because of per se renal involvement. Out of this classification, it is important to note almost 90% are primary. And out of those 90% is idiopathic. So amongst the idiopathic, we have a subvariety called as minimal change nephrotic syndrome. Like I mentioned, histologically there will be very minimum or no change on histology of the renal biopsy. You can also get varied patterns. You should just know the names. as an undergraduate, that is focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. So if you take a biopsy, in segments there is sclerosis. Then there is membranoproliferative glomerulonephritis. So MPGN is another component. You can also have membranous glomerulonephritis. Just know the names, that is more than sufficient. Then you have another entity called congenital nephrotic syndrome. Important point to note that congenital nephrotic syndrome occurs within 6 months of age. Generally, it will have the similar features and it can present as an AKI. That is an acute kidney injury. Now, coming to the secondary causes. The secondary causes include connective tissue disorders, most commonly SLE presenting as lupus nephritis, or HSP which presents as an AKI. You can also have it induced because of infections in India, most commonly because of TB and measles, followed by hepatitis B, C and malaria. And miscellaneous causes of course always includes drugs, malignancies and bee stings. So coming to the clinical features. Generally the nephrotic age group we all know is less than 5 years of age. Generally. Not hard and fast rule, but generally it is a nephrotic age. In contrast, the nephritic age is 5 to 15. So generally it's an easy way to remember, less than 5 years is nephrotic. Theoretically speaking, 6 months to 7 years is generally what you see. Symptoms are most commonly of insidious onset. Presenting feature will be a typical facial puffiness with morning edema or periorbital edema, more in the mornings. Now, why periorbital edema is because periorbitally the amount of soft tissue is more. Number 1. Number 2, why in the mornings it is more is because the child sleeps in a supine position. So there tends to be an accumulation of fluid periorbitally. So that is an explanation for why it is a morning edema. Thirdly, oliguria, it generally occurs as a following feature of edema because the amount of circulating volume is reduced and there is an accumulation of fluid in the interstitium and there is a failure for excretion. It's as simple as that. So this photo is a typical periorbital edema. Facial puffiness is not as much in this child, but with this periorbital edema in the nephrotic age group, you can think of nephrotic syndrome. Now, we all know the gradings of edema. I will just revise that once. So with this, just assuming this is a leg, grade 1 edema is below the ankle. This is grade 1. Grade 2 is below knee. Grade 3 is above knee. And grade 4 is generalized or anasarca. So those are the rough grading of edema. And keeping that in mind, the features of anasarca include ascites, pedal edema, vulval edema, penile edema or scrotal edema depending on the child. So all of these are features to look for. And pitting pedal edema is a typical and characteristic feature which never should be missed. So to describe the nephrotic edema in simple terms, a pitting bilateral pedal edema with periorbital puffiness will generally be seen. You must always examine the scrotum, abdomen, see for ascites and look for pleural effusion. Apart from that, it could be precipitated most commonly because of infections. So look for a focus of fever, look for peritonitis, look for cellulitis, and if the child is normotensive, do consider that the child could also be in shock. A brief contrast between nephrotic syndrome and acute glomerulonephritis. Nephrotic syndrome will generally be insidious, whereas AGN will be of an acute onset. A strong history rather of a preceding fever will be there for both, but it will be more significant in case of an AGN where there was a history of impetigo or pharyngitis beforehand. The predominant feature in AGN is hematuria, and the child will come with a complaint of reduced urine output. Whereas in nephrotic syndrome, the child will come with a typical chubby appearance with a good periorbital puffiness will generally present as anasarca and later will go for reduced urine output and complications of shock and ascites and pleural effusion. Seizures may or may not be there in acute glomerular nephritis. So a short note can come to differentiate and compare and contrast between nephrotic syndrome and AGN. This table is again more than enough. You can just elaborate briefly in that. Now, in nephrotic syndrome, you should also look for certain atypical features like hematuria, hypertension, steroid resistance, reduced complement levels, joint involvement, rash, and renal failure. Why these are called atypical features is 99 or rather 999 times out of 1000 you will not see any of these. Presence of hematuria goes more in favor of AGN, hypertension again goes more in favor of AGN, but in complicated nephrotic syndrome you can get it. So just as a star mark you should know these can be the atypical features as well. So there can be a brief overlap of symptoms, but it is highly rare and highly unlikely. Now, as far as the investigative workup is concerned, the basic investigations what we do, the complete CBC will always be done. The hemoglobin will rule out anemia and the differential count and total count will rule out infections or suggest in which line the infections will be there. Urine routine to be done. The protein investigations will detect proteinuria. It's very easy and that is often the diagnostic hallmark for nephrotic syndrome. Also, urine sugars microscopy also do need to be done. Always important to send a culture the first time a child is being worked up for nephrotic syndrome to detect an underlying UTI. UTI could be the trigger. Subsequently, biochemical investigations of urea, creatine, electrolytes do need to be done because this collectively does form the RFT. Renal function test is mandatory to do and serum cholesterol for diagnostic purpose is mandatory. Method of doing the urine routine, qualitative method, we already know it's about turbidometric method. For theoretical sake, you should know about it. The proteins which are present in the urine tend to get denatured if you give acid and or heat. So turbidity is compared to whatever the standard is there. It can detect all proteinuria, it's not albumin specific. From biochemistry days, you already know all of this. So it is the same thing. Just only thing is there is a high chance of getting a false positive. A child on antibiotics also may show a slightly higher value. Urine dipstick is more of a semi-quantitative method. It's compared and contrasted based on the color what you get, and based on the color you can detect it as in what range as per milligram per deciliter. Presence of lipid bodies in urine can also be seen on urine microscopy. And coming to the specific investigations, a 24-hour urine protein is to be done, and in that it generally will show a nephrotic range of proteinuria of more than 1 gram per meter square per 24 hours. Now the important thing is the urine PCR, that is protein creatinine ratio. A nephrotic range of PCR is more than 2. So this bit I'll just give a little extra emphasis on it. The normal range is less than 0.2. 0.2 up to 2 is considered as a nephritic range. More than 2 is considered as a nephrotic range. So less than, I'm repeating this, less than 0.2 is normal. 0.2 to 2 is considered as a nephritic range. More than 2 is considered as a nephrotic range. And apart from that, you should also check for serum complement levels if atypical features are present only, otherwise not required. Always important to consider doing a Mantoux test and chest X-ray because it is a prerequisite for initiating treatment of nephrotic syndrome with corticosteroids. And consider doing a renal biopsy only if it is a congenital nephrotic syndrome, there is steroid resistance, or if there is any presence of atypical feature. Now the specific indications for renal biopsy I will list out. It is just a few points. Point number 1, age at presentation less than 1 year or age more than 15 years at presentation, number 1. Number 2, sustained hypertension. Okay, number 2. Number 3, presence of an acute kidney injury. This is debatable, but better to do it. Number 4, proven steroid resistance. And number 5 is persistent hematuria. I am repeating the 5 points again. Age at presentation less than 1 year or more than 15 years. Sustained hypertension, acute kidney injury, proven steroid resistance, or persistent hematuria. Coming to the lab differentiation, nephrotic syndrome of minimal change, generally because it's the most common, will have a urine protein of 3 plus to 4 plus. Urine lipid bodies will be there. 24-hour urine protein more than 1 gram per square meter per 24 hours. Urine PCR more than 2. Albumin less than 2.5. And cholesterol more than 250 is what was given in the old edition. Recent update is it is 200. Please keep it as 200. Subsequently, glomerulonephritis of acute nature, protein of 1 plus to 2 plus will be there with the presence of urine RBC and CAST, and azotemia, hyperkalemia, elevated ASLO. The triad of nephrotic syndrome pops up once again. I am reiterating this because this is very, very important. Proteinuria more than 2 gram per meter square per day. Hypoalbuminemia of less than 2.5 gram per deciliter, or serum cholesterol more than 250 milligram per deciliter per day. In old, new one is 200. Please remember it as 200. Now coming to the treatment, first thing to do is confirm the diagnosis of nephrotic syndrome. We have already done that based on the investigations, whatever we have done. Number 1. Number 2, confirm typical versus atypical features. Number 3 is to rule out the infections. Number 4 is to rule out TB. Number 5 is rule out complications. I will enumerate that, and regarding parent and child education. So, we classify the treatment into general as well as specific. General treatment, of course, one is supportive, one is edema management, one is complication management, one is vaccination. The general treatment, I will come to it in a bit, and specific also will come separately. So, in supportive treatment, we need to give a good amount of proteins to the child with normal amount of calories and go for salt restricted. Go for salt restriction if child is edematous. Then, as far as edema is concerned, you need to go for fluid restriction measures and start the child on albumin infusion or diuretics if necessary. Generally, it will be done. And corticosteroids will be started for the child because that is the mainstay of treatment for nephrotic syndrome. The key point comes in vaccinations. Live vaccinations should be avoided while on the treatment for nephrotic syndrome, but you must also give pneumococcal and Haemophilus influenza vaccines upon 4 weeks upon completion of the course, mandatorily for all children. So, coming to the algorithm. Before coming to that, let me simplify it a little bit more with a few terminologies which will make it easy to understand. So, you have a child with nephrotic syndrome diagnosed and you are initiating the treatment. We will come to the treatment in a bit. Upon treatment, you do a repeat test for the child. Because it's a part of follow-up, you need to do that. The first term, what we need to understand, is called as relapse. A relapse is defined as a urine albumin of more than 2 plus for 3 consecutive days in an early morning sample in a child previously in remission. So, now we should understand what is remission. Remission is nothing but urine albumin in nil or trace for 3 consecutive days in a child. So, if you treat the child and then you assess for 3 days consecutively. If urine albumin comes as nil or trace, you have got the child into remission. Relapse is where the urine albumin is more than 3 plus for 3 consecutive days in early morning sample, previously with the child in remission. Then the third terminology is what we call as frequent relapse. A frequent relapse is more than 2 relapse in 6 months or more than 4 relapse in a year. Steroid dependence is where the child is on 2, or rather the child has had 2 consecutive relapses when the child is on alternate day steroids or within 14 days of discontinuation. So this is steroid dependence. I'll repeat this. 2 consecutive relapses with the child on alternate day steroids or within 14 days of discontinuation is steroid dependence. Coming to steroid resistance, it is the absence of remission. It is the absence of remission with the child on oral prednisolone or daily prednisolone, having completed the full course of 4 weeks daily and 4 weeks of alternate day. Why I am stressing on these definitions first is, while going through the algorithm, it will be better understood. So I have told 5 definitions: relapse, remission, frequent relapse, steroid dependence, and steroid resistance. Steroid dependence versus steroid resistance, a simple way to keep in mind. Steroid dependence, as long as a child is on steroids, child is in remission. You take out the steroid, child goes in for relapse. Number 1. Number 2 is if the child is on steroid resistance, as long as the child is being treated, despite that the child has never gone in for remission. That is nothing but steroid resistance. So coming to the treatment protocol per se, when you have the first episode of nephrotic syndrome in the absence of hypertension, hematuria, or azotemia, we start with prednisolone 2 mg per kg daily for 6 weeks, followed by 1.5 mg per kg alternate days for 6 weeks. Upon doing this, either the child will get into remission or may go for infrequent relapse, frequent relapse because of steroid dependence, or steroid resistance. If infrequent relapse, you continue one more round of treatment. If frequent relapse, you refer to a higher center where a more detailed evaluation does need to be done, and maintain the child on alternate day steroid. If the child is in steroid resistance, refer immediately because a biopsy needs to be done. For an undergraduate, if you remember this much, it's more than enough. Just keep in mind the treatment is prednisolone 2 mg per kg daily for 6 weeks, followed by 1.5 mg per kg on alternate day for another 6 weeks. So totally it is a 12-week treatment. If you remember that much, it is more than enough. The dosage of prednisolone, I have already told, it is 2 mg per kg per day initially. If you want to remember it as per body surface area, it is 60 mg per meter square per day. Remember this much, it is more than enough. Now coming to the complications. The complications of nephrotic syndrome can include a massive edema, malnutrition. They are prone for infections in form of peritonitis, cellulitis, pneumonias, urinary tract infections. They are prone for thromboembolisms, prone for hypotension, and prone for shock. Apart from that, you should also do a workup for hypothyroidism, iron deficiency anemia, vitamin D deficiency, growth failure, and steroid toxicity, all in one. Now, question will come: peritonitis. If you are suspecting a peritonitis, it will present more often than not as a pain abdomen. So it is important to ensure that you evaluate that thoroughly and it's not missed out. The typical features of peritonitis will be a peritoneal fluid tap will show more than 250 cells per millimeter cube of fluid, and proven on a gram stain or a gram culture. A DVT is also prone, and child is prone for vascular complications also, where there could be an asymmetry of the limb, or it might even go for a central venous or cerebrovenous thrombosis. If the child is in shock, there will be prolonged capillary filling and a short stature with Cushingoid features because of steroid toxicity. Now, to manage the complications or infections rather, antibiotics are required to treat infections. Hypovolemia has to be corrected by giving fluids or albumin preferably. Anticoagulants need to be given for a child where thrombosis is seen. And parental education is important to ensure they understand the nature of the disease process and understand the significance of coming for regular follow-ups, number 2. Number 3, for doing a routine urine examination periodically at the required frequency. As and when the child recovers, you can slowly taper it down. It should also be important to ensure that the parent keeps a diary for the urine examination and the medications received as well as intercurrent infections, and that routine activity is maintained and school attendance is also maintained with appropriate immunization and other measures. Now on follow-up, I've already told the definitions of remission and relapse. Target is to ensure that the child is in remission. It's more important for a child to come in follow-up if it is steroid sensitive, dependent or resistant. A steroid sensitive, fine, if the child is in remission, you can stop, periodically keep them in follow-up. Well and good if they are able to maintain without steroids. If steroid dependent, then there is a risk of the child going in for relapse while tapering, again to be treated accordingly. This is to be identified. So the key here is identifying it. You can identify it if the child comes for follow-up. And in steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome, you should identify early. The key thing is you should identify steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome early so that workup can be done quickly. You should just know the other medications which are used in steroid dependent and steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome, namely cyclophosphamide, chlorambucil, though not used too commonly. Levimazole is used frequently along with cyclosporin and tacrolimus. Remember these 4, it is more than enough. To briefly just conclude, it's the most common glomerular disease in children. It has a chronic course, responds well to steroid therapy with a good prognosis if identified early. Maintaining follow-up is important, and it's important to watch for the side effects of the immunosuppressions. So as you all know, depending on your university pattern, the exam questions, you all are well aware about the definitions, describing the entire disease process and complications, or a brief note about any one of the individual topics. So with that, I come to the end of this presentation. Thank you for tuning in and hope you tune into the next one also.